Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. On today's episode, it's a Halloween special. We're taking a little break from our coverage of the Legacy of the Force series to shine a quick spotlight on a Star Wars horror story, one that takes place more than 3,000 years before the events of A New Hope. On the frozen planet Odassar Faustin, Darth Scabrous has a dream to transform the Sith into an unstoppable army, one driven by a bloodthirsty hunger for living flesh. But there's one problem. Scabrous is missing the final ingredient for his diabolical experiment, a rare black orchid. But when he discovers the flower at the Jedi Agricultural Corps, it's up to one young Jedi to stop the Sith Lord's dream from becoming the galaxy's nightmare. It's Red Harvest by Joe Schreiber. And I'll talk about the book coming up in just a few moments. But first, let's start with listener questions. I have 2 emails today, both from friend of the show, Robin, in Germany. Robin's first email says, "Hello, Aaron. Can a Jedi become an actor? It's one of the plot points of Tales from the Empire, The Final Exit. What do you think?" Absolutely, Robin. I believe a Jedi can be an actor. I think a Jedi can have any job they want. Farmer, banker, doctor, lawyer. It doesn't matter. I just think that whatever walk of life a Jedi would pursue, it would be in the service of helping people. Now, I know what you're asking. How does an actor fall into that category? Well, actors help create art. So, if the Jedi, as an actor, brings a smile to someone's face, inspires someone to create something magnificent, if the Jedi's portrayal of a character inspires someone to take action in their lives in order to better themselves or help others, then absolutely, I think the Jedi can be an actor. I still think the Jedi's primary motivation should be to be an agent of peace and justice throughout the galaxy. But that's not saying that some of those goals can't be achieved by another occupation instead of being something like a warrior monk like they are normally portrayed. Now, on to Robin's second question. Looking back at all of Star Wars media, I would say Darth Revan really gave the Sith their iconic black outfits, a mix of a dark Jedi robe and Mandalorian battle armor. We later see this look recycled with the blue and red guard of the Old Republic and the Galactic Empire. It's very different from other Sith Lords like Naga Sato, Darth Malak, and the pureblood Sith of ancient times. What do you think? Is the desire to make the Sith look like Darth Vader in the movies a problem for a new bad guy? Well, Robin, I'm glad you included that last bit about Darth Vader's look from the original trilogy. Because, let's face it, that's where the iconic look for the Sith comes from in the Star Wars saga. Now, I understand what you mean in your email. You're talking about in-universe, in the story. And of course, Darth Revan lived 3.5 millennia before Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader. So maybe you're right. Maybe Revan's look did inspire many of the Sith Lords that followed. But in my opinion, this is one of those questions that has an out-of-universe answer. The answer is Darth Vader's look is iconic. even people that have never watched a Star Wars movie or television show, or read a Star Wars comic book, or have no interest in consuming any Star Wars media, knows what Darth Vader looks like. So in my opinion, that is the inspiration for the looks of the various Sith Lords, even the ones going back into antiquity. Now, the second part of your question there, is it difficult for Star Wars in the modern age to sort of recreate the Darth Vader look, the Sith look in the movies? Is that a problem for any new bad guy? And the answer to that is maybe. Personally, I liked Kylo Ren's look in the sequel trilogy. It harkened back to Darth Vader. And in numerous times in that trilogy, we saw Kylo Ren / Ben Solo talk to the memory of his grandfather, a person that he had never met. I liked that homage. I liked the villain that Kylo Ren / Ben Solo portrayed in most of the sequel trilogy. There were some parts that I wasn't on board for, but overall, I thought he was a good villain. We'll have to see going forward. As we sit here today, at the end of 2025, the biggest villain we have in Star Wars, the movies or the television shows, seems to be Grand Admiral Thrawn. For those of us who enjoy the stories in Legends, Grand Admiral Thrawn, for the most part, is celebrated as a really cool, really interesting, really smart Star Wars villain. We'll have to see how that portrayal goes forward in any of the Star Wars films or television shows that he is used, and whether or not the general public will like that portrayal. So that's one possible issue. The other, as you say, going forward, what will we get as far as villains go? And that's something I'm interested to see. Whether the villain is going to be another Sith, whether the villain is going to be some sort of military leader, or whether it's going to be something completely different. And I guess fingers crossed that if they feel like they need to harken back to the way Darth Vader looked, that it resonates with audiences. And if they feel they can create a villain that doesn't look like Darth Vader or many of the other Sith that we've seen, but that the public will really embrace, then I think that's fine as well. And I hope it works. Thank you for your questions, Robin. Now, listener, if you have a question for the show, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com, or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, you can record a short message and email it in. But please record it in MP3 audio format. Now it's time for today's book, Red Harvest by Joe Schreiber, a Star Wars horror story for Halloween. grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. The story begins at the Sith Academy on the frozen world of Odassar Faustin. The Academy students compete in the classroom and in the fighting ring to impress their instructors and to draw the attention of the leader of the Academy, Darth Scabrous. But getting the Sith Lord's attention is difficult to do, because Scabrous spends almost all of his time in his laboratory at the top of his black tower. Nobody knows what Scabrous is doing up there, but there are plenty of rumors. The students can hear strange noises emanating from the tower, and occasionally, one of their own stops showing up for classes. Now, officially, the instructors say that any student who washes out of the academy is immediately shipped off-world. Unofficially, well, some of the noises coming from Scabrous's tower sound awfully familiar. Elsewhere in the galaxy, on the planet Marfa, Hestizo Trace tends to the flora at the Jedi Agricultural Corps laboratory. Where most Jedi find assignment to the Agricultural Corps a disappointment, Hestizo is a little different. The Padawan isn't all that talented in the Force, but she does possess a gift. Hestizo can bond with plants. In particular, she's able to form a bond with the mysterious Murakami orchid, an extremely rare flower that possesses a high midichlorian count and needs to bond with a Force user in order to survive. Hestizo is able to form a bond with one of these black orchids, enabling the two to talk to each other through the Force. Of course, the Murakami orchid is the final ingredient Darth Scabrous needs to complete his experiment. In the Sith Temple below the Academy Library, Scabrous finds a holocron built by the ancient Sith Lord Darth Dreer. Dreer was obsessed with discovering the secret to immortality. Dreer never found it, but he did create an elixir that brought on a living death in the subjects he injected, and it infused those subjects with an insatiable hunger for living flesh. Now, Darth Scabrous thinks he can improve on Dreer's formula. Scabrous believes that it's not just the orchid that's required to perfect his elixir. Scabrous believes he needs the Jedi that the orchid is bonded to. As the Academy instructors continue to teach their cutthroat education, one of the students is struggling. Whim Nictor is trying his best to impress the Sith, but his best clearly isn't good enough. And everybody, including Nictor, knows it. During training, Nictor is challenged to a lightsaber duel by Rance Lusk, the strongest student in the class. Lusk toys with Nictor, landing blow after blow with the training swords, before finally battering the weaker student into submission. Now, when the duel is over, Nictor is taken to the infirmary, where the medical staff puts him to sleep in order to tend to his injuries. But when Nictor wakes up, he finds himself no longer in one of the medical bays. He's hunched down on all fours in a small cage in the middle of a dark room. Nictor starts to panic. He pulls at the bars of the cage, but it's no use. They won't budge. When Nictor looks around the room, he sees strange medical equipment and what looks like human bones. Back on Marfa, Hestizo wakes up in her room like she does every morning. But this morning is different. because Histizo doesn't hear the Murakami orchid calling out to her like usual. Histizo dresses quickly and heads to the incubation chamber where the orchid is kept. She opens the chamber's hatch and is stunned to see the body of another Jedi lying on the floor, an arrow sticking out of his back. Suddenly, Histizo hears the orchid calling out to her, "Help, Histizo! Help!" The Padawan walks into the orchid's vault and comes face to face with an enormous whippet. The orchid's vessel in one hand and a spear in its other, a spear pointed directly at Histizo. The whippet orders Histizo to come with him back to his ship. When they arrive, he forces the Padawan into a cell and sets the vessel containing the orchid just outside her cage. Now the whippet is a bounty hunter named Tulk, who takes Histizo and the Murakami orchid to Odasser Faustin. Tulk turns the Padawan and the flower over to Darth Scabrous, collects his bounty, and then heads back to the elevator to leave the tower. Histizo watches the Sith Lord take the orchid over to a vat filled with a yellow solution. When Scabrous drops the flower into the vat, it cries out to Histizo, but the Padawan is helpless to do anything. Scabrous hits a button. Blades within the vat begin to spin, faster and faster, chopping the orchid up and turning the solution a deep black. Scabrous hits another button and sends the liquid through about a dozen tubes to a cage where inside Histizo sees a teenage boy. Scabrous injects the solution into the boy. He cries out, a blood-curdling scream that shakes Histizo out of her frozen state. The boy slams his head against the sides of the cage. Blood spatters across the floor. He spasms and then collapses, dead. "What have you done?" Histizo screams at Scabrous. He turns to face her, and then the boy's body twitches. Scabrous and Histizo stare at the body. It twitches again and raises up onto its knees. Scabrous grins while Histizo can't believe what she's seeing. The Sith Lord opens the door to the cage. "Come out, Nictor," he says. The boy crawls out of the cage and stands, his eyes dark, bloody. Scabrous takes a step toward the boy when suddenly it lets out an inhuman scream and leaps at Scabrous, sinking its teeth into the Sith Lord's arm. Terrified, Histizo turns to flee. She sprints to the elevator. As the doors close, Histizo watches Darth Scabrous push out with the Force and sends the body flying across the laboratory. Histizo leaves the tower just as the thing that used to be Nictor comes flying out of the top-level window. It slams into the snow, bones snapping. Several of the Sith students gather around the body when it suddenly rises up and attacks, biting anyone within reach. The students flee in panic. Histizo starts to run when she's suddenly grabbed by a furry paw and yanked down behind a wall. It's Tulk. The whippet says that whatever is happening is evil, and it's time for them to leave. Meanwhile, on the planet Geonosis, Jedi Knight Rojo Trace investigates the crash site of a Sith starship. As Rojo searches the wreckage, he receives a Force vision. His sister Histizo is in danger. Rojo sees Histizo being kidnapped by a whippet. Rojo immediately travels to Marfa and investigates the scene at the Jedi Agricultural Corps facility. Rojo continues to feel his sister's terror and uses it to follow the whippet's trail deep into Sith space. When Rojo arrives on Odassar Faustin, he sneaks through the snow to the Sith Academy and discovers a nightmare. Hundreds of undead students attacking and devouring any living thing they can find. But Rojo can still feel his sister, and she's alive. Rojo can feel her presence in the area of the Academy Library, a building that's starting to go up in flames. In the temple beneath the library, Darth Scabrous straps Histizo onto an altar. The infection has ravaged the Sith Lord's body, but he hasn't succumbed to it fully. "You're the key," Scabrous tells Histizo. "It's not just the Murakami orchid that I need. I need you, the Jedi that it's bonded to." Scabrous says he needs to cut out Histizo's heart and consume it, taking over her ability to control the orchid. Slowly, the Dark Lord raises a ceremonial Sith sword. He plunges it down toward the Padawan's chest, but it's stopped by Rojo Trace's lightsaber. The Jedi knocks Scabrous off the altar and cuts his sister free. He tells Histizo to run, but just then, Scabrous appears behind Rojo and runs his sword through the Jedi's back, killing him. The Sith Lord then closes in on Histizo. She turns to run, but there's nowhere to go. It looks like the end when Histizo hears a voice. It's the orchid. "I'm sorry, Zoe," it says. "It hurts. Help me, please." "Grow!" Histizo shouts. "Grow! Grow now! Grow! Grow!" Scabrous sneers and then raises his sword. And then he stops. He looks confused. There's something happening. Histizo watches in horror as vines begin shooting out of the Sith Lord's body. They snake out of his ears, his nose, his eyes. He screams, and his body explodes as the orchid erupts from within, destroying the Sith Lord. Histizo avoids the undead students and escapes the library. She's picked up by Tulk and a spaceport mechanic named Frode. Together, the three clear the planet's orbit. However, the Whipped soon shows Histizo a bite mark on his arm. He's been infected. He makes Histizo promise to launch him out of the ship's airlock. But before she can, the two are attacked by an undead stowaway. The creature reaches for Histizo, but she dodges. Histizo hits the button, blowing open the airlock, sending Tulk and the creature out into space. The story ends with Histizo returning to Marfa. The Agricultural Corps has found a new Murakami orchid, and the Jedi want Histizo to use her gift to bond with the flower. But Histizo has other plans. It's time for the Padawan to return to the temple on Coruscant to complete her Jedi training. Time to take a break. On the second half of the show, I'll talk more about Red Harvest by Joe Schreiber. I'm Aaron Moats, and you're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But let me suggest a book from Star Wars canon. Force Collector is the story of Kar Nuke Sin, who's just a typical teenager, except whenever he touches an object, he receives a vision. His parents believe Kar is sick, but his grandmother has a different idea. She thinks Kar is touched by the Force. Kar runs off to find the truth about the Force and about the mysterious people called the Jedi. Will he learn the answers to his questions? Or will Carr be stopped by the First Order? Check out Force Collector by Kevin Shinnick. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. And today, I'm talking about the Star Wars Legends horror story, Red Harvest, by Joe Schreiber. Red Harvest is actually a prequel to Schreiber's other Star Wars horror novel, Death Troopers. In that story, there is an Imperial Star Destroyer and a prison barge that becomes infected with some mysterious virus that turns people into undead zombies hell-bent on devouring the living. Red Harvest was written to explain the origin of that infection. And of course, the origin is Sith alchemy. I'm not the biggest horror fan. I don't generally watch horror films. I do watch suspenseful films. I like the original Halloween. I like the second Halloween. But the scary movies I like are more like psychological thrillers, like Psycho, or Strangers on a Train, or The Thing. I'm not really into zombies, vampires, monster-type movies. I've seen some of them. Some of them are really good. But I'm just not an aficionado. What I like in this story is that for the most part, Schreiber doesn't go into really deep details about the scenes where the zombie students are killing and devouring their classmates. Is there some? Absolutely. But I like that he leaves most of it up to the reader's imagination. Because personally, I think people imagine horror to the level at which they prefer. If you like something really scary, really gory, you can imagine that. If you like it a little more on the lighter side, you can imagine that. And I like that Schreiber, for the most part, writes this story that way. Now, I'm sure you figured out that the plot summary I gave in the first half of the show was pretty meager. I gave you basically what happened at the beginning of the book, one or two things in the middle of the book, and then yada, 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 all the way to the end with how the book concluded. And that's because the majority of the book is a somewhat standard zombie story. Our heroes are constantly being pursued by the undead, and their numbers are growing. We see little scenes of other Sith students who are trying to escape the Horde. We know they're not going to be able to escape, but the suspense and the terror comes through the instances where they do escape, but for just a few moments. Hestizo Trace is the classic horror final girl. She's the one that we know is going to succeed. She's the one who's going to escape and is going to destroy Darth Scabrous and the virus. And she does succeed, at least partially. Because while she is able to reach the remnants of the Orchid through the Force, and stop Darth Scabrous. And she keeps the infection from escaping Odasser Faustin. The infection is still there on the planet. And if nobody else knows about it, then eventually it's going to get off-world. Flash forward 3,500 years, and it does. And that's how we get Death Troopers. As far as specifics go in Red Harvest, I really like the character of Hestizo Trace, the Padawan. I like getting a look at Jedi who are a little bit different. Robin's question at the beginning of the show about whether or not a Jedi could be an actor or some other type of occupation. And we see that in this story because Hestizo is basically a horticulturalist. She's a botanist. She enjoys working with plants. She enjoys performing scientific studies, experiments, in order to help these plants grow and thrive. You could see Hestizo helping to work on a world that has had some sort of devastation, whether a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, and trying to bring the flora and the fauna of the world back to life. There are some moments at the beginning of the story where Hestizo and the orchid are talking to each other using the Force. The orchid, in some scenes, seems like a toddler. In other scenes, it seems like it has the intelligence of a teenager. And Hestizo talks to it in the same way that you may see a mother speak with a child, or maybe a better comparison is how a teacher speaks to a younger student. You know, how a teacher would speak to an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. And I like that. I would love to see additional stories of Jedi using their gifts in other ways. You know, I think I said it before on the show, one of my biggest surprises in reading some of these stories for the first time was reading the MedStar duology and seeing the healer that Barriss Offee was in Legends. And I loved it. I really enjoyed those two stories. Hestizo Trace in this story, embracing the work she is doing with the Agricultural Corps as other Jedi sort of look down upon it, a place for those who are not as strong in the Force. But she's embracing her work. She really enjoys it. And I like seeing those type of stories. You know, hopefully going forward in some of these canon stories, we'll see more Jedi who are using their gifts in other ways. Maybe there will be a Jedi actor in canon. Maybe there will be a banker or a mechanic or a lawyer or some other profession where it's just a little different spin on how the Force can be used to help the lives of everyone in the galaxy. The last thing I'll say about Red Harvest, and even a little bit about Death Troopers, the other Schreiber book, is I like when Star Wars branches out occasionally and does something different. It's a big galaxy out there. There's plenty of room for the occasional horror story. We got a little of that in the Ahsoka show with the Death Troopers there, reanimated corpses inside the Stormtrooper armor. Maybe that was an homage to Schreiber's book. And we've seen a few other instances. Some of the episodes on Dathomir in the Clone Wars animated show. A couple episodes in the first season of The Mandalorian had a horror vibe to them. Sanctuary with the AT-ST, seemingly this monster that comes stomping out of the woods. And in Chapter 6, The Prisoner, the scene where the lights in the prison complex are strobing and you see the Mandalorian sneaking up behind Miggs Mayfeld. So there are sprinklings of horror throughout Star Wars, and I like that. Now, will Star Wars ever just make a horror film or an episode of a show that is almost completely horror? I don't know. I think it's more likely that it would be on streaming, on television, than it would be on film. And I don't think it would be as gory or terrifying as some of your classic horror movies or television shows. But, as I said before, the galaxy far, far away is pretty big. Now, listener, it's time to wrap up. If you'd like to contact the show, you can email me at swlegendslounge@gmail.com, or you can send me a message on Blue Sky, Instagram, or Twitter at swlegendslounge. You can ask me a question, send me your favorite Star Wars character group, or let me know if you disagree with something that I've said on the show. I love reading all the stuff that you guys send into me. Coming up on the next episode, we get back into the Legacy of the Force series. Darth Caedus continues to manipulate the war between the Galactic Alliance and the Corellian Confederation. And soon, he'll make a move to bring the Jedi Order under his control. Join me and guest co-host Scott in 2 weeks as we talk about Inferno by Troy Denning, book number 6 in the Legacy of the Force series. You can look for that episode to come out on November 14th. Listener, thank you so much for tuning in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge today. I'm Aaron Motes. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in legends.